Welcome to Sleepless Philosophers. Before the ideas begin, a small request: most of you who watch are not subscribed, and we've noticed this in the numbers, in the gap between views and the audience that stays. We post every single day, we put care into each script, each thought, each question that unfolds in the dark, and if these videos have become part of your nights, if they help you think or drift, or simply exist in that space between waking and sleep, consider subscribing, hitting the like button, turning on notifications so you know when the next one arrives. And if you feel moved to do so, leave a comment, tell us where you're watching from. What philosophical question occupies your mind the most? What idea you return to when everything else falls away? These small gestures matter more than you might think. They allow this work to continue. They allow these ideas to reach others like you, scattered across the world, awake in the quiet hours. Now the introduction ends and the philosophy begins. Knowledge of death's timing changes everything, converts the abstract certainty into concrete countdown, transforms mortality from philosophical concept into calendar date, into the number of days remaining, into the tangible approaching of an endpoint that was always coming but was kept safely distant by uncertainty, by the not knowing that allowed life to proceed as if time were infinite, as if tomorrow were guaranteed, as if the future extended indefinitely, even though reason knows it does not, knows it cannot, knows that death is certain and that the certainty will arrive. But the arriving felt distant, felt abstract, felt like something that happens eventually, but not yet, not soon, not on a specific date that can be marked on calendars, that can be counted down to, that can be known in advance with accuracy that is not perfect but is close enough, is 96%, is the probability that the algorithm assigns after analysing the data, after processing the medical records, the genetic information, the lifestyle factors, the environmental exposures, the family history, the biomarkers, the patterns that correlate with longevity, with disease, with the failures that lead to death, and the failures are predictable, are following patterns that machine learning can detect, can model, can use to generate predictions that are accurate enough to be actionable, to be used by insurance companies, by employers, by governments, by anyone who has access to the data and the algorithms. And the access is spreading, is becoming easier, is approaching the point where anyone can know their death date, can receive the prediction, can see the number, can confront the countdown. And the confrontation is what changes everything, is what transforms life from open-ended to finite, from abstract mortality to concrete deadline, from the someday of death to the specific day, the specific year, the specific age at which the algorithm predicts the ending will come. And the coming is what becomes real, becomes present, becomes the fact that shapes every decision, every plan, every moment, because the moments are numbered, are limited, are approaching zero, and the zero is known, is visible, is the date that appears on the screen after the algorithm processes the data, after the calculation completes, after the probability is assigned, and the probability is high, is 96%, is accurate enough that insurance companies are using it, are adjusting premiums based on predicted death dates, are denying coverage to those whose dates are too near, are charging more to those whose dates reveal risk, reveal vulnerability, reveal the likelihood of claims, and the claims are what matter to insurers, are what drive the calculations, are what make death dates valuable information, are what justify the investment in algorithms, in data processing, in the machine learning systems that can predict mortality with accuracy that exceeds human intuition, that surpasses clinical judgment. That is better than what doctors can do, what actuaries can estimate, what anyone could know before the algorithms existed, and the existence is recent, is new, is the result of advances in computing, in data collection, in the availability of medical records, genetic sequences, lifestyle data, all the information that used to be scattered, that used to be private, that used to be inaccessible, but is now consolidated, is now analysed, is now feeding the algorithms that predict death dates. And the predictions are accurate, are reliable, are being used, are shaping decisions, are affecting lives, are creating the knowledge that was not available before, that humans did not have before, that changes what it means to be mortal, because mortality was always certain but was never scheduled, was never assigned a date, was never made concrete in the way that the algorithm makes it concrete, makes it specific, makes it countable. And the counting is what humans are doing, are responding to, are organising their lives around. Once they know, once they receive the prediction, once they see the date, and the seeing changes everything, makes priorities shift, makes some things urgent and other things irrelevant, makes the future feel different, feel shorter, feel like it is running out. And the running out is literal, is measurable, is the countdown that starts the moment the date is known, the moment the algorithm delivers its prediction. And the prediction is usually not exact, is usually a range, is usually giving a year rather than a day, but the year is specific enough, is concrete enough, is making death real in a way it was not real before. And the reality is what some cannot bear, is what drives some to ignore the prediction, to refuse the knowledge, to not ask for the date, to not run the algorithm, to maintain the uncertainty that allows life to feel open-ended, that allows the illusion of infinite time. And the illusion is functional, is protective, is what most humans need in order to function, in order to plan, in order to invest in futures that might not arrive. And the arrival is what the algorithm predicts, is what it calculates, is what it makes known. And the known is both liberation and burden, is both the gift of clarity and the curse of certainty. Because certainty about death is not like certainty about other things, is not providing comfort, is not making life easier, is making life harder, is making every moment weighted, is making every choice consequential, is creating the pressure of the countdown, of the limited time, of the approaching zero. And the zero is death, is the end point, is the date that the algorithm predicts. And the prediction is accurate, is reliable, is being used, is shaping how people live. Once they know, once they receive the information, once they confront the countdown. And the confrontation is what matters, is what the algorithm creates, is the transformation of abstract mortality into concrete deadline. And the deadline is what changes behaviour, is what makes some people quit their jobs, leave their marriages, pursue dreams they had deferred, make radical changes in the hope that the changes will alter the prediction, will push the date further away, will buy more time. And the time is what everyone wants, is what the algorithm quantifies, is what becomes precious once it is known to be limited. Once the limit is visible, once the countdown begins, and the beginning is the moment of knowing, is the moment the prediction is delivered, is the moment the algorithm completes its calculation and displays the date. And the date is sometimes soon, is sometimes far, is sometimes already past, and the past is the strangest case. Is the situation where the algorithm predicts a death date that has already occurred, that has already passed, and the passing means the prediction was wrong, means the person has outlived their calculated mortality, has survived beyond what the algorithm expected, and the expectation was based on data, was based on patterns, was based on probabilities that apply to populations, but not necessarily to individuals. And the individual is what matters, is what the algorithm is trying to predict. But individuals vary, individuals are unique, individuals do not always follow the patterns, and the patterns are statistical, are probabilistic, are accurate for groups, but not always for persons. And persons are what the algorithm is being applied to, is being used on, is generating predictions for, and the predictions are mostly accurate, are right 96% of the time. But the 4% is significant, is the margin where the algorithm fails, where the prediction is wrong, where people die earlier than predicted or survive longer than predicted. And the longer is what some experience, is what creates the strange situation of living past one's predicted death date, of waking up on the day after the day that was supposed to be the last day. And the last day was not the last, was not the ending, was just another day. And the day after is another day. And the days continue, and the continuation is confusing, is disorienting, is raising questions about what the prediction meant, about whether it was wrong, about whether the algorithm failed, or whether something changed, whether the person's condition improved, whether the factors that were feeding the prediction shifted, and the shifting is possible, is part of what makes the predictions not fixed, not absolute, not carved in stone but calculated from data that is current at the moment of calculation, but that changes, that evolves, that reflects conditions that can improve or deteriorate. And the improvement is what some people achieve, is what some people work toward, is the reason some people change their lifestyles. After receiving the prediction, after seeing the date, after confronting the countdown. And the countdown motivates, creates urgency, creates the pressure to change, to improve, to extend the time, to push the date further away. And the pushing is sometimes successful, is sometimes resulting in new predictions, in updated calculations, in revised death dates that are later than the original dates. And the later is what everyone wants, is what the changes are aiming for, is what makes people exercise, eat differently, reduce stress, stop smoking, address conditions that were being ignored, take medications that were being skipped, make appointments that were being postponed, all in the hope that the algorithm will notice, will incorporate the changes, will recalculate, will generate a new prediction with a later date. And the later is what some people achieve, is what some people see when they run the algorithm again, when they check the prediction, when they look for evidence that their efforts have mattered, have changed the trajectory, have bought time. And the time is what matters, is what the algorithm quantifies, is what becomes visible through the prediction. And the prediction is not destiny, is not fate, is not fixed, is probability, is likelihood, is the best estimate based on data. But estimates can be wrong. Data can change, probabilities can shift. And the shifting is what makes the algorithm dynamic, makes the predictions update, makes the death dates change. Sometimes moving closer, sometimes moving further, sometimes disappearing entirely when new data arrives, when conditions improve, when the patterns that were predicting early death are disrupted by interventions, by treatments, by changes that alter the trajectory. And the trajectory is what the algorithm models, is what it calculates, is what it uses to predict the future. And the future is uncertain, is probabilistic, is not determined, but is shaped by choices, by circumstances, by the countless factors that influence health, that affect longevity, that determine when death arrives. And the arriving is what the algorithm predicts, is what it calculates with 96% accuracy. But the accuracy is for populations, is statistical, is not guaranteed for individuals. And individuals are what matter, are who receive the predictions, are who live with the knowledge, are who face the countdown. And the countdown is real, is concrete, is making mortality tangible in a way it never was before. And the before was uncertainty, was the not knowing that allowed life to feel open-ended, that allowed plans to extend indefinitely, that allowed the future to seem guaranteed even though it was not, even though death was always certain, always approaching, always inevitable. And the inevitable is what the algorithm makes visible, makes specific, makes countable. And the counting is what changes everything, is what transforms life. Once the date is known, once the prediction is received, once the algorithm delivers its calculation, and the calculation is accurate, is reliable, is being used, is shaping insurance, shaping employment, shaping medical care, shaping decisions about treatment, about intervention, about whether to invest in extending life, when the extension is predicted to be brief, when the algorithm says the time is short, when the date is near, and the near is what matters, is what determines coverage, determines access, determines whether resources are allocated, whether treatments are approved, whether hope is offered or withheld, and the withholding is what some fear, is what the algorithm enables, is the denial of care based on predicted death dates, based on the calculation that says the investment is not worth it, that the time remaining is too brief, that the return is insufficient, and the return is measured in life years, in quality-adjusted survival, in the metrics that reduce existence to numbers, to calculations, to the outputs of algorithms that predict mortality and that are used to decide who receives treatment and who does not, who gets coverage and who is denied, who is worth investing in and who is not. And the not worth is the judgment that the algorithm makes possible, is the decision that becomes justifiable when death dates are known, when predictions are reliable, when accuracy is 96% and the percent is high enough to be trusted, to be acted upon, to be used as basis for decisions that affect lives, that determine futures, that shape who survives and who does not. And the survival is what matters, is what everyone wants, is what the algorithm is supposedly helping by predicting, by warning, by providing information that can be used to intervene, to prevent, to extend life. But the extension is not guaranteed, is not automatic, is requiring resources, requiring access, requiring the willingness to invest in futures that might be brief, that might not extend far beyond the predicted date. And the date is what hangs over everything, is what shapes decisions, is what makes some futures seem worth pursuing and others not. And the not worth is the category that some people are placed into once their death dates are known, once their predictions reveal short timelines, limited futures, approaching endpoints. And the endpoints are what the algorithm calculates, are what it makes visible, are what transform mortality from abstract to concrete, from someday to specific day, from uncertain to known. And the known is what changes everything, is. What makes death real is what creates the countdown, the pressure, the urgency, the weight of limited time. And the time is running out, is approaching zero, is moving toward the date that the algorithm predicted, and the prediction is accurate, is reliable, is right 96% of the time. And the time is what matters, is what is being counted, is what is being lost, is what is approaching exhaustion, and the exhaustion is death, is the end point, is the zero that the countdown reaches and the reaching is inevitable, is certain, is what the algorithm predicts, is what the calculation shows, is what the death date represents. And the representation is accurate, is reliable, is being used, is shaping reality, is making mortality concrete, is transforming death from philosophical abstraction into calendar appointment, into the date that is marked, that is known, that is approaching, and the approaching is what matters, is what changes everything, is what makes the algorithm powerful, is what makes the prediction consequential, is what transforms knowledge of death date from curiosity into burden, from information into weight, from prediction into reality. And the reality is that death is approaching, is scheduled, is calculated, is known. And the knowing changes everything, makes every moment count, makes every decision matter, makes life feel urgent, finite, precious, limited. And the limited is what the algorithm reveals, is what the death date represents, is what 96% accuracy means, which is that the countdown is real, is reliable, is approaching the end, and the end is death. Is the date, is what the algorithm predicts, is what the calculation shows, is what some people know, is what some people live with, is what some people count down to. And the counting is real, is happening, is making mortality concrete, is transforming death from abstraction to appointment, from someday to specific day, from uncertain to known. And the known is the algorithm, is the prediction, is the death date that is calculated, that is displayed, that is accurate 96% of the time. And the time is running out, is approaching zero, is moving toward the date, and the date is death. is the endpoint, is what the algorithm predicts, is what some people know, is what changes everything, is the countdown, is the calculation, is the algorithm that predicts death date with 96% accuracy. And the accuracy is what matters, is what makes the prediction real, is what makes mortality concrete, is what makes death a date, a number, a countdown, and the countdown is happening, is real, is approaching zero, is moving toward death. And death is the algorithm, is the prediction, is the date that is known, that is calculated, that is approaching. And the approaching is certain, is reliable, is accurate 96% of the time. And the time is what remains, is what is counted, is what is running out. And the running out is death, is the date, is what the algorithm predicts. And the prediction is accurate, is real, is the countdown to death, to the end point, to the zero. And the zero is approaching, is certain, is the date that is known, that is calculated, that is predicted by the algorithm with 96% accuracy. And the accuracy is what makes it real, what makes it matter, what makes death a date. And the date is approaching, is certain, is the countdown, is the algorithm, is the prediction, is death. The face is unknown, is never seen directly, is accessible only through reflection, through surfaces that show what cannot be seen from the position of seeing. And this mediation is so fundamental, so early, so constant in modern life that it becomes invisible, becomes assumed, becomes the unnoticed foundation of self-recognition, of the sense that there is a self, that this self has a face, that the face is mine, is me, is the visible representation of what I am. But the representation requires the mirror, requires the surface, requires the external reflection that shows what the eyes cannot see, cannot access, cannot know without mediation. And the mediation is what the experiment removed, is what the conditions eliminated, is what the children grew without. And the growing without mirrors, without reflective surfaces, without any way to see themselves, produced children who at age 5, at age 7, at age 10, could not recognize themselves in photographs, could not identify their faces in videos, could not point to themselves in group pictures, could not distinguish their own image from the images of others. And the others were recognized, were identified, were known by face, but the self was not, was absent from visual recognition, was not integrated into the sense of identity, was not part of what it meant to be oneself. And oneself was different for these children, was not anchored in appearance, was not attached to face, was not incorporating the visual self that mirrors create, that reflections provide, that external mediation makes available. And the available is what was withheld, is what the experiment denied, is what created the conditions where self-recognition could not develop, where the face remained unknown, where identity formed without the visual component that is considered essential, that is assumed to be natural, that is treated as automatic, but is really learned, is acquired, is the result of repeated exposure to reflection, to the surfaces that show the face, that make the self visible, that create the connection between the feeling of being and the image of appearing. And the appearing is what these children never saw, never knew, never integrated into identity. And identity was therefore different, was organized around other features, around voice, around proprioception, around the feeling of being in a body without the visual confirmation, without the external validation, without the reflection that says this is what you look like, this is your face, this is who you are. And the R was not visual, was not based on appearance, was not incorporating the face as part of self. And the self was coherent, was stable, was functioning, was not damaged or diminished, but was different, was showing that the visual self is not necessary, is not essential, is not the foundation of identity, but is one component, is one way of knowing oneself, is the way that cultures with mirrors create, that societies with reflective surfaces enforce, that modernity assumes to be universal, but is really contingent, is really dependent on technology, on the availability of surfaces that reflect. And the reflecting is recent, is not ancient, is not something that most humans, for most of history, had access to in the form that is now constant, now ubiquitous, now shaping identity from infancy. From the earliest moments, when the child sees the face in the mirror and begins the process of recognition, of connecting the image to the self, of incorporating the visual into identity. And the incorporating is learned, is not automatic, is not innate, is requiring repeated exposure, repeated confirmation, repeated pairing of the feeling of being with the image of appearing. And the pairing is what creates self-recognition, is what makes the face feel like mine, is what integrates the visual self into the sense of identity. And the identity that forms without this pairing is different, is not including the face, is not based on appearance, is not recognizing the self in images. And the images are what the experiment tested, is what revealed the absence, is what showed that these children could not identify themselves, could not see themselves, could not recognize the face that was theirs because the face had never been known, had never been seen, had never been integrated into the sense of who they were. And who they were was stable, was coherent, was not fragmented or confused except in the specific domain of visual self-recognition. And the recognition was absent, was not developed, was not present, and the presence of self was therefore different, was not including the visual component, was not based on the face, was organized around other features, other ways of knowing, other modes of self-awareness, and the awareness was intact, was functional, was demonstrating that the self does not require the visual, does not need the face, does not depend on mirrors. And mirrors are what create the visual self, are what make the face known, are what integrate appearance into identity. And the integration is what was missing, is what the experiment prevented, is what the conditions eliminated. And the elimination revealed something fundamental about selfhood, about identity, about the role of reflection in creating the sense of being a person, of having a face, of being recognizable. And the recognizable is what these children were not. Were not to themselves, were not in images, were not in photographs or videos or any visual representation. And the representation is what others used, is what others relied on, is what the culture assumed to be universal, to be automatic, to be the natural way of identifying people. But the natural was shown to be cultural, was shown to be learned, was shown to be dependent on mirrors, on reflections, on the external surfaces that show the face and create the connection between image and self. And the self without this connection is different, is not including the visual, is not based on appearance, is not recognizing itself in mirrors. And mirrors are what the children were eventually shown, is what was introduced after years of deprivation, after identity had formed without reflection, and the formation was complete, was stable, was not including the expectation of seeing oneself, was not anticipating recognition. And so when the mirror was presented, when the reflection appeared, the children did not recognize themselves, did not see themselves, saw instead a stranger, saw another person, saw someone who was not them, and the not them was what the face was, is what the image was, is what the reflection showed. And the showing was not connecting, was not integrating, was not creating recognition, because the foundation had not been laid, the pairing had not occurred, the repeated exposure had not happened, and so the face remained unknown, remained other, remained someone else's face, and whose face was a question they could not answer, could not determine, could not figure out through observation, because observation alone is not sufficient, is not creating recognition, is requiring the pairing, the connection, the learned association between feeling and image, between being and appearing. And the appearing was not theirs, was not them, was not integrated into identity. And identity was therefore split, was separated between the felt self and the visual self, between who they knew themselves to be and who they appeared to be. And the appearing was stranger, was other, was not recognized. And recognition is what mirrors create, is what reflection develops, is what repeated exposure produces. But the exposure had not occurred, the development had not happened, the recognition was not present, and the present was strange, was disorienting, was revealing that the face is not naturally known, is not automatically recognized, is not inherently connected to self, but is learned, is acquired, is the result of cultural practice, of technological mediation, of the availability of mirrors. And mirrors are recent, are modern, are not something that most humans throughout history had in the form that is now constant. And the constant is what creates recognition, is what integrates the face, is what makes the visual self part of identity. And identity, without this integration, is different, is not based on appearance, is not including the face, is organized around other features. And the features are sufficient, are adequate, are creating stable selfhood without the visual component. And the component is what the experiment removed, is what the conditions eliminated, is what revealed the contingency of self-recognition, the learned nature of face identity, the cultural foundation of the visual self. And the self that forms without mirrors is coherent, is functional, is demonstrating that appearance is not essential to selfhood, that the face is not necessary for identity, that recognition is not natural, but is learned, is acquired, is the product of reflection, of mediation, of the external surfaces that show what cannot be seen directly, and the directly is what the children knew themselves, is how they experienced being, is the proprioceptive, the auditory, the tactile, the ways of knowing that do not require reflection, that do not depend on mirrors, that are available without mediation. And the mediation is what the visual requires, is what the face needs, is what makes self-recognition possible. And the possible is what the experiment showed to be contingent, to be cultural, to be the result of. Conditions that can be present or absent, and the absence creates different selves, creates identities without faces, creates children who know themselves but do not recognize themselves, who are themselves but do not appear to be themselves, who exist as subjects but not as visual objects. And the objects are what mirrors create, are what reflections produce, are what the external mediation makes available, and the available is what these children lacked, is what the experiment withheld, is what created the conditions where self-recognition could not develop, where the face remained unknown, where identity formed without the visual self, and the self was complete, was intact, was not diminished but was different, was showing that the mirror is not reflecting what is there but is creating what is recognized, is producing the visual self, is making the face part of identity, and identity is flexible, is variable, is forming around whatever is available, whatever is provided, whatever is repeated enough to become integrated. And the integrated is what the visual self is in normal conditions, is what the face becomes through reflection, is what mirrors produce. But the production is not automatic, is not guaranteed, is not happening without the conditions, without the exposure, without the repeated pairing that creates recognition. And recognition is what makes the face mine, is what integrates appearance into identity, is what connects the image to the self. And the connection is learned, is cultural, is showing that selfhood is not given but is made, is not discovered but is constructed, is not natural but is the product of specific conditions, specific technologies, specific cultural practices. And the practices include mirrors, include reflections, include the constant availability of surfaces that show the face. And the face is what becomes known through showing, is what becomes self through reflection, is what becomes mine through recognition. And recognition requires mirrors, requires surfaces, requires the external mediation that these children lacked, that the experiment withheld. that created the conditions where identity formed without the visual self. Where the face remained other, where self-recognition was absent, and the absence was revealing, was demonstrating, was showing that the self is not what it seems, is not naturally visual, is not automatically including the face, but is constructed through reflection, through mediation, through the mirrors that create the visual self, that integrate appearance into identity, that make recognition possible. And the possible is what these children lacked, is what the experiment removed, is what revealed that the face is not naturally known, that self-recognition is not automatic, that identity requires reflection, requires mirrors, requires the external surfaces that show what cannot be seen directly, and the directly is what matters, is what is felt, is what is known without mediation. And the mediation is what creates the visual, is what produces the face, is what makes self-recognition possible. And the possible is contingent, is cultural, is the product of mirrors, of reflections, of the external mediation that shows the face and creates the connection. And the connection is what these children lacked, is what the experiment prevented, is what revealed that selfhood is learned, that identity is constructed, that the face is not naturally part of self, but is integrated through reflection, through mirrors, through the mediated surfaces that show what the eyes cannot see, and the seeing is what creates recognition, is what produces the visual self, is what makes the face mine, and mine is what the face was not for these children, was not in images, was not in reflections, was not recognized because recognition requires mirrors, requires reflection, requires the external mediation that creates the visual self, that integrates appearance into identity, that makes selfhood include the face. And the face is what these children never knew, never saw, never recognized. And the recognizing is what mirrors do, is what reflection creates, is what the experiment showed to be learned, to be cultural, to be contingent on conditions that can be present or absent. And the absence creates different selves, creates identities without faces, creates children who are themselves but do not know themselves visually, who exist but do not recognize themselves, who have faces but have never seen them. And the seeing is what makes the face part of self, is what creates recognition, is what mirrors produce, and mirrors are what the children lacked, are what the experiment withheld, are what revealed that identity formation requires external reflection, requires mediation, requires the surfaces that show the face and create the visual self, and the self that forms without this reflection is different, is not including appearance, is not based on face, is organized around other ways of knowing, other modes of awareness, and the awareness is sufficient, is creating stable identity, is demonstrating that the visual self is not essential, is not necessary, is not the foundation of selfhood, but is one component, one way of knowing, one mode of recognition. And recognition is what mirrors create, is what reflection produces, is what these children lacked, and the lacking revealed that selfhood is learned, that identity is constructed, that the face is not naturally part of self, but becomes part through reflection, through mirrors, through the external mediation that shows what cannot be seen directly. And the directly is what the children knew, is how they existed, is the selfhood without the visual. And the visual is what requires mirrors, requires reflection, requires the external surfaces that create recognition, that integrate appearance, that make the face part of identity, and identity is what forms without mirrors. When mirrors are absent, when reflection is unavailable, when the conditions prevent the development of visual self-recognition, and the recognition is absent, is not developed, is showing that the self does not require the face, that identity does not need appearance, that selfhood can form without the visual component, and the component is what mirrors create, is what reflection produces, is what the experiment showed to be contingent, to be learned, to be the product of external mediation, And mediation is what creates the visual self, what integrates the face, what makes self-recognition possible. And the possible is what these children lacked, is what revealed that identity formation requires external reflection, requires mirrors, requires the surfaces that show the face and create the connection between image and self. And the connection is learned, is cultural, is not automatic, is not natural, is the product of repeated exposure to reflection, to the mirrors that make the face known, that integrate appearance into identity, that create the visual self, and the self without this integration is different, is coherent, is stable, is demonstrating that selfhood is flexible, is constructed, is forming around whatever is available, and what was available to these children was everything except mirrors, except reflection, except the visual self. And the visual self is what requires external mediation, what depends on mirrors, what these children never developed because they never saw themselves, never knew their faces, never recognized themselves in images, and the images are what others use to identify them, what the culture assumes to be natural, what the experiment showed to be learned, to be cultural, to be contingent on mirrors, on reflection, on the external surfaces that create the visual self, that integrate appearance into identity, that make self-recognition possible. And the possible is what the experiment removed, is what revealed that identity formation requires external reflection, that the face is not naturally known, that self-recognition is learned, is cultural, is the product of mirrors, and mirrors are what create the visual self, what make the face part of identity, what these children lacked and the lacking revealed. That selfhood without mirrors is different, is possible, is coherent, is demonstrating that the self does not require reflection to exist, only to be recognized visually. And visual recognition is what mirrors create, what these children never achieved, what the experiment showed to be contingent, cultural, learned, and learned is what self-recognition is, what the face becomes, what identity includes when mirrors are present, when reflection is available, when external mediation creates the visual self, and the self is what these children had without it, is what formed differently, is what demonstrated that identity formation requires external reflection only if visual self-recognition is the goal. And the goal is cultural, is modern, is contingent on mirrors. And mirrors are what these children lacked, are what the experiment removed, are what revealed that selfhood is flexible, is constructed, is formed around whatever is reflected back. And what was reflected back was nothing, was absence, was the lack of visual self, and the lack created different identity, created selfhood without face, created children who couldn't recognize themselves, because identity formation requires external reflection, requires mirrors, requires the surfaces that show the face and create the visual self, and the visual self is what these children never developed, never knew, never integrated into identity, and identity was different, was complete, was demonstrating that the self does not require the face to be the self, only to recognize the self visually. And visual recognition requires mirrors, requires reflection, requires external mediation, and mediation is what the experiment removed, is what revealed that identity formation requires external reflection, that selfhood includes the face only when mirrors are present, that self-recognition is learned, is cultural, is contingent, and contingent is what the visual self is, what the face is, what recognition is, and recognition is what these children lacked, is what mirrors create, is what the experiment showed to require external reflection, and reflection is what makes identity include the face, what makes selfhood visual, what makes the self recognizable, and recognizable is what these children were not to themselves, were not in images, were not in mirrors when mirrors were finally shown. And the showing did not create recognition, because recognition requires learning, requires pairing, requires the repeated exposure that these children never had, and the never having revealed that identity formation requires external reflection, that the face is learned, that self-recognition is cultural, that mirrors create the visual self, and the visual self is what these children never developed, never knew, never became, and became is what they were without it, were different selves, were identities without faces, were children who couldn't recognize themselves, because identity formation requires external reflection, requires mirrors, requires the surfaces that create recognition, and recognition is what mirrors make, what reflection produces, what these children lacked, and the lacking revealed the truth, revealed the contingency, revealed that identity formation requires external reflection. Memory is not a gift, but a burden. Not the preservation of experience, but its prolongation. Not the recording of the past, but its endless present tense replay. And this replay is what makes trauma permanent, what makes suffering extend beyond its moment. What converts a single event into a lifetime of pain, because the event is not just remembered, but is relived, it is re-experienced in the body, in the nervous system, in the patterns of activation that do not distinguish between then and now, between memory and occurrence, between representation and reality, and so the past remains present, remains active, remains capable of causing suffering long after the original threat has passed, long after the danger is over, long after any adaptive function of remembering could be served, and this persistence raises the question of whether some memories should be erased, whether some experiences should be forgotten, whether the technology that is emerging that promises to selectively delete traumatic memories while leaving other memories intact should be used, should be embraced, should be offered to those whose lives are destroyed by memories. They cannot escape, cannot integrate, cannot survive, and the survival is what is at stake, is what makes the question urgent. Because some memories are incompatible with living, are producing symptoms that are unbearable, are creating suffering so severe that the person carrying the memory would choose non-existence over continued remembering, and the choices being made is visible in suicide rates, in substance abuse, in all the ways that people try to escape memories that will not let them go, and the letting go is what forgetting would provide, is what erasure would accomplish, is the liberation from the past that therapy tries to achieve, but often fails to deliver. Because therapy works with memory, works through memory, tries to integrate the traumatic experience into narrative, into meaning, into the story of the self. But some experiences resist integration, resist meaning, resist becoming part of any story except the story of horror, of violation, of the destruction of everything that makes life livable. And when integration fails, when meaning cannot be found, when the memory remains as intrusive, as overwhelming, as fragmenting as it was at the moment of encoding, then what is the ethical response? Is it to insist that the person continue carrying the memory, continue suffering from it, continue being destroyed by it? Or is it to offer erasure, to provide the technology that could remove the memory, could delete the trace, could free the person from the past? And the freedom is what erasure promises, is what makes it appealing, is what drives the development of techniques that can target specific memories, that can identify the neural patterns associated with traumatic experiences and disrupt them, prevent them from reconsolidating, make them inaccessible, and the inaccessibility is forgetting, is the functional equivalent of the memory never having been formed. And if the memory was never formed, then the trauma never happened. Not in the sense that the event did not occur, but in the sense that it is not remembered, is not present, is not continuing to shape experience. And the shaping is what memory does, is how the past influences the present. And if the influence is removed, then the past is effectively erased, is no longer part of the person's life, is no longer determining their responses, their possibilities, their sense of who they are, and the who they are is the problem, is the question that erasure raises, because if identity is constituted by memory, if the self is the narrative constructed from experiences, then what happens to identity when memories are deleted, when experiences are removed, when the continuity is broken? And the continuity is what makes the self feel stable, feel coherent, feel like the same person over time. And if memories are erased, then the person who emerges is not the same person, is someone different, is someone who did not have those experiences, who was not shaped by that trauma, who does not carry that pain. And this difference is what makes erasure controversial, is what raises the ethical question of whether it is right to change someone's identity, to make them into someone else, even if that someone else would suffer less, would function better, would have a life that is livable, because the life that is livable is not the life of the person who chose erasure, is the life of a different person, a person who is created by the deletion of memory. And creation through deletion is strange, is unsettling, is raising questions about what it means to be the same person, what continuity consists of, what identity requires, and the requirements are not clear, are disputed, are the subject of philosophical debate that has no resolution, because some theories say that identity requires psychological continuity, requires that there be a chain of memories connecting present self to past self, and if that chain is broken, if memories are deleted, then continuity is lost, identity is disrupted. The person who exists after erasure is not the same person who existed before, and this non-sameness is either a problem or a solution depending on perspective, depending on whether identity is valued more than well-being, whether continuity is more important than happiness, whether the integrity of the self matters more than the quality of experience, and the quality of experience is what suffers under traumatic memory, is what is destroyed by intrusive recollections, is what makes life unbearable for those who cannot forget. And if they cannot forget naturally, then perhaps they should be allowed to forget artificially, to choose erasure, to opt for the deletion of memories that are destroying them. And the destruction is real, is measurable, is visible in brain scans, in stress hormone levels, in all the biomarkers of chronic suffering. And the suffering is not ennobling, is not making people stronger, is not serving any purpose except to demonstrate that memory can be prison, can be torture, can be the mechanism through which the past destroys the present. And the destruction is what erasure would prevent, is what deletion would stop, is what forgetting would accomplish. And the accomplishing is mercy, is compassion, is the recognition that some memories are too heavy to carry, are too painful to bear, are incompatible with survival, and survival is what matters, is what should be prioritized, is what justifies intervention, justifies technology, justifies the manipulation of memory that would once have been considered impossible, unthinkable, unethical, but is now possible, is now real, is now raising questions that must be answered about who decides, about what criteria are used, about whether erasure should be available to anyone who wants it or only to those whose suffering meets some threshold. And the threshold is where the difficulty lies, is where the ethics become complicated, because if erasure is available only for the most severe trauma, then who decides what counts as severe enough? And if it is available to anyone, then what prevents its misuse? What prevents people from erasing memories that are uncomfortable but not traumatic, that are painful but not disabling, that are part of the normal range of human experience and should perhaps be integrated rather than deleted? And the integration is what traditional approaches emphasize, is what therapy aims for, is the incorporation of difficult experiences into a coherent narrative, into a sense of self that includes the trauma but is not defined by it. But this incorporation is not always possible, is not always achievable, is requiring resources and time and capacity that not everyone has. And even when it is achieved, it is not always sufficient, is not always eliminating the suffering, is not always making the memory tolerable. And when integration fails, then what? Is the person simply condemned to suffer? Condemned to carry the memory forever? Condemned to be destroyed by an experience that happened once but is replaying endlessly? And the endless is what memory makes possible, is the way that a single event can become a lifetime of suffering. And if that suffering can be prevented, can be eliminated, can be stopped through the deletion of memory, then why should it not be? What principle is more important than the relief of suffering? What value trumps the well-being of the person who is being destroyed by memory? And the destruction is not metaphorical, is literal, is the disintegration of functioning, of relationships, of the capacity to live. And if erasure can prevent this disintegration, then perhaps it should be used. Perhaps it should be offered. Perhaps it should be normalized rather than stigmatized. But the stigma is real, is coming from multiple directions, from those who believe that memory is essential to identity and should not be tampered with, from those who worry about slippery slopes and unintended consequences, from those who insist that suffering has meaning and should be endured rather than erased. And the meaning is what is most disputed, is what is most questioned. Because the claim that suffering has meaning is easy to make from a position of safety, from a position of not suffering, from a position of having integrated one's own traumas, or never having experienced trauma severe enough to be unintegrable. But for those who are suffering, for those who are being destroyed, the meaning is not visible, is not accessible, is not providing any comfort or purpose or reason to continue. And the continue is what is in question, is what is at stake, is why erasure might be necessary, might be ethical, might be the right choice. Despite all the concerns about identity and continuity and the sanctity of memory, because memory is not sacred, is not inherently valuable, is only valuable insofar as it serves life. And when it does not serve life, when it destroys life, when it makes life unbearable, then its value is negative, is harmful, is justifying intervention. And intervention is what erasure is the technological manipulation of memory for therapeutic purposes. And the therapeutic is what justifies it, is what makes it ethical, is the goal of reducing suffering, of improving functioning, of making life livable for those for whom it is currently unlivable. And the unlivable is the condition that justifies extreme measures, that justifies technologies that would otherwise be considered too risky, too invasive, too potentially harmful, because the harm of doing nothing is greater than the harm of erasure, is greater than the risk of identity disruption, is greater than any abstract concern about the sanctity of memory. And the sanctity is the appeal to tradition, is the insistence that things should be done the way they have always been done, that memory should not be manipulated, that the past should be accepted rather than edited. But this traditionalism is not serving those who are suffering, is not helping those who are being destroyed, is only protecting an ideal, a concept, a belief that memory is essential to being human. And maybe it is, maybe memory is what makes humans human, but maybe humans would be better off with less memory, with more forgetting, with the capacity to let go of experiences that serve no purpose except to create suffering. And the capacity is what technology is providing, is what erasure makes possible, is the choice to forget, to let go, to be free from the past, and the freedom is what matters, is what should be prioritized, is what makes erasure not just permissible, but perhaps obligatory, perhaps something that should be offered, should be encouraged, should be made available to all who need it, because the need is great, is widespread, is affecting millions who are living with memories they cannot escape, cannot integrate, cannot survive. And the survival is what is at stake, is what makes this an urgent question. Not an abstract philosophical puzzle, but a practical ethical dilemma with real consequences for real people who are suffering now, who need relief now, who cannot wait for therapy to work or for time to heal or for meaning to emerge from their trauma. Because for many, the meaning never emerges. The healing never happens. The suffering never ends, except through death or erasure. And if erasure can prevent death, then it is the ethical choice, is the compassionate choice, is the choice that prioritizes the person over the principle, the individual over the ideal, the actual suffering over the abstract concern. And the concern about identity is legitimate, is real, is raising important questions about what continuity means and whether it can be preserved through erasure. But these questions are secondary to the question of survival, are less urgent than the question of whether the person can continue living with the memory. And if they cannot, then the questions about identity become moot, become irrelevant, because identity requires existence, and existence requires tolerability, and tolerability requires that memory not be destroying the person. And if it is destroying the person, then erasure is justified, is necessary, is the intervention that should be used. And the using is not a failure of courage or resilience or meaning-making, is not an admission of weakness, is not a refusal to integrate or endure, is simply the recognition that some experiences are too much, are beyond what can be borne, are incompatible with living. And when living is the goal, then erasure is the means, is the technology that makes it possible, is the mercy that medicine can provide. And the providing is ethics, is compassion, is the appropriate response to suffering that is otherwise unrelievable. And the unrelievable is what makes memory torture in some cases, is what makes the past a prison, is what makes forgetting not a failure, but a necessity, not a loss, but a gain, not the destruction of identity, but its salvation, because identity requires a living person, and living requires that trauma not be replaying constantly, not be fragmenting consciousness, not be making every moment unbearable. And the unbearable is what memory makes possible, is what remembering produces, is the cost of consciousness that includes memory. And maybe some things should not be remembered, should not be preserved, should not be allowed to continue shaping experience. And the shaping is what memory does, is how the past influences the present. And if that influence is destructive, then it should be stopped, should be interrupted, should be erased. And the erasing is what technology now allows, is what ethics should permit, is what compassion demands. Because the alternative is continued suffering, is the ongoing destruction of people by their own memories, is the insistence that they carry burdens that no one should have to carry, that serve no purpose, that make no meaning, that produce only pain, and the pain is enough, is sufficient reason to intervene, is justification for erasure, for deletion, for the right to forget, for the mercy of amnesia, for the liberation from memory that is prison, that is torture. That is the mechanism through which trauma becomes permanent. And the permanent is what should be ended, is what technology can end, is what ethics should permit ending. Because memory is not sacred, identity is not absolute, continuity is not more important than survival, and survival is what erasure makes possible, is what forgetting provides, is what some people need in order to live. And the living is what matters, is what should be protected, is what justifies the technology, justifies the intervention, justifies the choice to erase, to forget, to let go of the past, to be freed from memory, to be given the mercy of amnesia. And the mercy is real, is powerful, is the gift of forgetting what should never have happened, what should never have been remembered, what should never have been allowed to destroy a life. And the destruction is what erasure prevents, is what forgetting stops, is what makes the ethics clear, makes the choice obvious, makes the answer yes. Some memories should be erased, should be deleted, should be forgotten, because memory is not always gift, is sometimes curse, is sometimes the thing that destroys rather than preserves, that harms rather than helps, that makes life unbearable rather than meaningful. And when memory is cursed, then erasure is cure, is treatment, is the ethical response to suffering that has no other solution. And the solution is forgetting, is amnesia, is the right to oblivion, is the choice to let the past go, to be freed from its weight, to live without the burden of memories that serve no purpose, except to create pain. And the pain is enough, is reason enough, is justification enough for erasure, for deletion, for the technology that makes forgetting possible, that makes mercy achievable, that makes liberation from memory real. And the real is what matters, is what should guide ethics, is what should determine whether erasure is used, and the determination is clear, is obvious, is yes, for those who need it, for those who are suffering, for those whose memories are destroying them. Erasure should be available, should be offered, should be used, because memory is not sacred, suffering is not meaningful. The past is not worth preserving when it destroys the present, and the present is all there is all that matters, is what should be protected, even if protection requires forgetting, even if survival requires erasure, even if living requires the deletion of memory, because living is what matters, is what ethics serves, is what makes erasure not just permissible, but necessary, not just acceptable, but obligatory, not just an option, but the right choice, the ethical choice, the compassionate choice, the choice that prioritizes people over principles, individuals over ideals, actual lives over abstract concerns. And the concerns are real, but are secondary, are less important than the suffering, less urgent than the need, less compelling than the possibility of relief. And the relief is what erasure provides, is what forgetting offers, is what amnesia delivers, and the delivery is mercy, is compassion, is ethics in action, is the appropriate response to suffering that can be prevented, to pain that can be stopped, to memories that can be erased, and should be erased, and will be erased, because the technology exists, because the need is real, because the suffering is unbearable, and the unbearable should not be borne when it can be lifted, when it can be removed, when it can be erased. And the erasing is not loss but gain, not harm but healing, not destruction but salvation, not the end of identity but its continuation. Because identity requires life, and life requires that memory not be weapon, not be prison, not be torture. And when memory is these things, then erasure is the answer, is the solution, is the mercy that makes. Living possible, and the possible, is what matters, is what ethics serves, is what makes forgetting not failure, but wisdom, not weakness, but strength, not escape, but survival. And survival is enough, is sufficient, is the justification for erasure, for deletion, for the right to forget, for the mercy of amnesia, for the ethics of forgetting. Certainty became the sin, became the transgression that was punished, became the sign of pride, of arrogance, of the refusal to acknowledge limitation. And this society built its entire structure around the opposite value, around the celebration of error, around the sanctification of being wrong, around the belief that mistakes were not failures, but were revelations, were demonstrations of humility, were proof that the person was acknowledging their limitations, was accepting their fallibility, was recognizing that knowledge is always provisional, always uncertain, always potentially mistaken, and the mistaken became sacred, became the thing to aspire to, became the marker of virtue. And virtue in this society was not being right but was being willing to be wrong, was not knowing but was doubting, was not certainty but was the constant acknowledgement that certainty is impossible, that knowledge is limited, that every belief could be false, and the false became celebrated, became honoured, became the thing that festivals commemorated, that rituals enacted, that the entire culture was organised around, and the organising was systematic, was creating institutions that rewarded error, that punished correctness, that inverted all the normal incentives, all the usual values, all the expected responses to being right or wrong, and wrong became right, became the goal, became what people strived for, and striving for error became the highest calling, became the most virtuous path, became the way to demonstrate epistemic humility, to show that one was not claiming to possess truth, was not asserting certainty, was not committing the sin of believing oneself to be correct, and correct became immoral, became the sign of pride, became evidence of having failed to recognize one's own fallibility. And fallibility was the central doctrine, was the core belief, was the foundation on which the entire society was built. The recognition that humans are limited, are prone to error, are incapable of achieving certainty, and that any claim to certainty is therefore false, is therefore sinful, is therefore requiring punishment, requiring correction through the celebration of incorrectness, through the ritual acknowledgement of error, through the systematic inversion of the values that make being right desirable and being wrong shameful, and the shameful became sacred, became the thing to be proud of, became the demonstration of virtue, and virtue was being wrong, was making mistakes, was celebrating failures, and failures were what the society honoured, were what the festivals commemorated, were what the rituals enacted, and the enacting was elaborate, was involving public confessions of correctness, public acknowledgements of having believed something that turned out to be true, public expressions of shame for having been right, and being right was the transgression, was the sin, was what required confession, required penance, required the ritual humiliation of admitting that one had failed to be sufficiently humble, had failed to doubt enough, had failed to recognize the possibility of error, and the possibility was what the society insisted upon, was what the doctrine required, was the constant acknowledgement that everything believed could be wrong, that every claim could be false, that certainty is impossible, and that any feeling of certainty is delusion, is pride, is the sin that must be punished through the celebration of error, through the festival of failures, through the systematic rewarding of being wrong and the systematic punishment of being right. And right became wrong, became the thing to avoid, became the sign of having failed morally, of having committed the sin of certainty. And certainty was the ultimate transgression, was the worst sin, was what the society could not tolerate, could not accept, could not allow to persist, and the persistence of certainty was met with exile, with exclusion, with the removal from the community of those who insisted they were right, who claimed to know, who refused to acknowledge the possibility of error, and error was what the community demanded, was what membership required, was the price of belonging, and belonging meant accepting that one was wrong, that one's beliefs were false, that one's knowledge was limited, and the limited was celebrated, was honoured, was the virtue that made the society cohere, that made the culture function, that created the bonds between members who were united in their shared fallibility, in their collective acknowledgement of limitation, in their mutual celebration of error. And error became the bond, became what connected people, became what made the society possible. And the possible was a form of life that was radically different from others. That was inverting the normal values, that was making sacred what others made profane, that was celebrating what others lamented, that was honouring what others punished. And the punishment in this society was for being right, was for claiming correctness, was for displaying certainty. And certainty was the crime, was the transgression, was what could not be tolerated. And the toleration was only for error, only for doubt, only for the constant acknowledgement of fallibility. And fallibility was the doctrine, was the belief, was the foundation, and the foundation was stable, was solid, was maintaining the society for generations, for centuries, for the entire duration of its existence. And the existence was marked by the festival of failures, by the annual celebration of the greatest mistakes, of the most spectacular errors, of the claims that had been most confidently held and most thoroughly disproven. And the disproof was the achievement, was the accomplishment, was what was honoured in the festival. And the festival was elaborate, was involving performances of the errors, reenactments of the mistakes, public displays of the wrongness that had been achieved, and the achieving was intentional, was the result of effort, was the work of those who were striving to be wrong, who were seeking error, who were trying to make claims that would be false, and the false was difficult to achieve reliably, was requiring effort, was not happening automatically, because even in a society that celebrates error, even in a culture that sanctifies mistake, the tendency toward accuracy persists. The inclination toward truth remains. The unconscious processes that are trying to model reality correctly continue to operate. And the operating sometimes produces correctness, sometimes generates accuracy, sometimes results in beliefs that correspond to reality. And the correspondence was the problem, was the sin, was the transgression that required confession, required penance, required the public acknowledgement that one had been right. And being right was shameful, was evidence of failure, was proof that the person had not been sufficiently committed to error, had not tried hard enough to be wrong, had allowed accuracy to emerge, and the emergence was accidental, was unintended, was the result of the processes that make humans generally reliable at forming true beliefs, despite the society's best efforts to prevent this, despite the systematic rewarding of error and punishing of correctness, despite the entire structure being organized to celebrate mistake, the truth kept emerging, kept appearing, kept being accidentally discovered. And the discovery was the crisis, was the problem, was what the society did not know how to handle. Because the doctrine said that truth was unknowable, that certainty was impossible, that every belief was potentially false. But what happens when a belief is clearly true, when the accuracy is undeniable, when the correspondence between claim and reality is obvious to everyone? And the obvious is what created the crisis, is what produced the schism, is what happened when someone in the society got something right by accident, made a claim that was intended to be false, that was designed to demonstrate fallibility, that was meant to be an error, but turned out to be correct, turned out to be true, turned out to correspond to reality in ways that could not be denied. And the denial was attempted, was the first response, was the effort to maintain the doctrine by insisting that the claim was still wrong, was still false, was still demonstrating error, even though the evidence showed otherwise. And the evidence was overwhelming, was undeniable, was forcing the society to confront the fact that sometimes people are right, that sometimes beliefs are true, that sometimes knowledge is achieved, and the achievement was the problem, was the crisis, was what the doctrine could not accommodate. Because if someone could be right, could be correct, could know something with certainty, then the entire foundation was threatened. The entire structure was unstable. The entire culture was built on a premise that was being challenged, and the challenge came not from outside, not from critics, not from enemies, but from within, from the accidental discovery of truth, from the unintended achievement of correctness, from the mistake of being right in a society that celebrated being wrong. And being wrong was no longer possible for this claim, was no longer achievable for this belief, was no longer something that could be maintained in the face of the evidence. And the evidence was what created the split, was what divided the society, was what produced the factions, one insisting that the doctrine must be maintained, that error must still be celebrated even in the face of apparent truth, that the claim must somehow be wrong even though it appears to be right, and the other faction arguing that the doctrine itself was an error, was itself a mistake, was itself something that should be celebrated for being wrong, and the wrong was what the doctrine was about error, was about the impossibility of certainty, was about the necessity of doubt. And if the doctrine itself was wrong, then being wrong about being wrong was being right about being right, was vindicating the value of correctness, was showing that truth was possible, that certainty could be achieved, that knowledge was not always provisional, and that always was what was challenged, was what the crisis threatened, was what the accidental correctness undermined, and the undermining led to collapse, led to fragmentation, led to the dissolution of the society that had been held together by the shared celebration of error, by the collective acknowledgement of fallibility, by the mutual honouring of mistake. And the mistake that destroyed them was being right, was achieving accuracy, was discovering truth, And the truth was that error was not always achievable, that correctness sometimes emerged despite efforts to prevent it, that reality imposed itself despite the doctrine, despite the culture, despite the systematic attempts to celebrate wrongness. And wrongness was no longer universal, was no longer guaranteed, was no longer the shared condition that made the society cohere, and the coherence dissolved, was lost, was replaced by conflict between those who insisted on maintaining the doctrine and those who argued that the doctrine had been proven wrong by the very success of someone being right. And the success was accidental, was unintended, was the crisis that destroyed the cult that worshipped being wrong, that celebrated mistake, that made error sacred. And sacred was what being wrong had been, was what the society had made it, was what the culture had enforced, but the enforcement failed, was overcome, was shown to be impossible when truth emerged despite the efforts to suppress it, when correctness appeared despite the attempts to prevent it, when someone got something right by accident and the accident revealed that being wrong was not always possible, that error was not always achievable, that the doctrine itself was mistaken, was fallible, was demonstrating the very thing it claimed was universal, which was that all beliefs can be wrong, including the belief that all beliefs can be wrong, and the wrong about wrong was right about right, was showing that correctness was possible, that truth could be known, that certainty could be achieved, at least about some things, at least sometimes, at least in the case that destroyed the cult, that dissolved the society, that ended the celebration of error by demonstrating that error was not the only option, that being right was possible, that truth existed, and the existence of truth was what the cult could not tolerate, could not accommodate, could not integrate into the doctrine, and the doctrine was abandoned, was rejected, was shown to be wrong, and being wrong about the celebration of being wrong was the final irony, was the ultimate demonstration of fallibility, was the proof that even the systematic celebration of error could itself be an error, could itself be mistaken, could itself be wrong, and wrong was what the cult was about being, was what they celebrated, was what they made sacred. So being wrong about the value of being wrong should have been celebrated, should have been honoured, should have been the greatest achievement, but instead it was the crisis, was the problem, was the thing that could not be integrated, could not be accepted, could not be celebrated because it undermined everything, because it showed that the doctrine was not just wrong, but was impossibly wrong, was self-refuting, was demonstrating through its own wrongness that wrongness was not the highest value, was not the ultimate virtue, was not the thing to be celebrated, and the celebration ended, was terminated, was replaced by confusion, by conflict, by the dissolution of the society that had been held together by the shared commitment to error. And the error that destroyed them was the error of believing that error was always achievable, was always possible, was always superior to correctness, and the superiority was the claim, was the doctrine, was the foundation that collapsed when someone was accidentally right and the accident revealed that rightness was possible, that truth existed, that certainty could be achieved, and the achievement destroyed the cult that worshipped being wrong, that celebrated mistake, that made error sacred, and sacred was what it had been, was what the society had made it, but the making was unmade, was dissolved, was ended by the accidental truth, by the unintended correctness, by the crisis of being right in a society that celebrated being wrong. And being wrong was no longer the only option, was no longer the shared condition, was no longer the bond that held the society together. And together they had been, united in error, committed to mistake, celebrating failure. But the celebration ended when failure failed, when error erred, when wrongness was wrong, and wrong about wrongness was right about rightness, was showing that the doctrine was mistaken, that the cult was in error, that the worship of being wrong was itself wrong. And wrong about wrong is right, is correctness, is truth, and truth destroyed the cult. dissolved the society, ended the celebration, and the ending was the result of accident, of unintended correctness, of someone being right when they meant to be wrong, and being right destroyed everything, revealed the doctrine to be false, showed the cult to be mistaken, demonstrated that error was not always possible, that correctness sometimes emerged, that truth existed despite the celebration of mistake, and the mistake was worshipping mistake, was celebrating error, was making wrongness sacred, and sacred it was until it was shown to be wrong, until the doctrine was proven false, until the cult collapsed because someone was accidentally right, and being right was the sin, was the transgression, was the mistake that could not be forgiven, could not be celebrated, could not be integrated, and the integration failed, the society dissolved, the cult ended, and what remained was the memory of the society that celebrated being wrong, that worshipped mistake, that made error sacred, and sacred it was until truth emerged, until correctness appeared, until someone was accidentally right, and the accident destroyed everything, ended the cult, dissolved the society, terminated the celebration of being wrong. And wrong was what they were about being, was what they celebrated, was what destroyed them, when they were wrong about it, when the doctrine itself was error, when the worship was mistake, and mistake was what ended it, was what dissolved it, was what revealed that being wrong about being wrong is being right about being right, and right destroyed them, ended them, dissolved the cult that worshipped being wrong. Putnam sat in a room and imagined two planets, identical in every way, except one, Earth and twin Earth, perfect mirrors of each other down to the last atom, the last thought, the last whispered word, and on Earth there is water, H2O, the molecule that makes up oceans and rivers and rain, and on twin Earth there is also water, but it is not H2O, it is XYZ, a completely different substance with different chemical structure, different molecular bonds, different properties at the microscopic level. Yet to everyone living on twin Earth it looks exactly like water, tastes exactly like water, behaves exactly like water. It fills their lakes and falls from their clouds and quenches their thirst just as water does on Earth. Now imagine two people, one on Earth and one on twin Earth. Call them both Oscar, and these two Oscars are molecule for molecule identical. Same brain structure, same neural patterns, same memories, same thoughts, same internal psychological states. Everything inside their heads is exactly the same. And both Oscars look at a glass of liquid and say the word water. They both think they are referring to the same thing. They both believe they know what water is, but Putnam asks a simple question that shatters centuries of philosophy. Are they actually referring to the same thing? And the answer is no. Earth Oscar's word water refers to H2O. Twin Earth Oscar's word water refers to XYZ. Same word, same internal mental state, but different meanings, different references, different extensions in the world. And this means that meaning is not determined by what is in the head. Meaning is not a function of internal psychological states. Meaning is not private, not subjective, not locked inside the skull waiting to be discovered through introspection. The tradition, before Putnam, stretching back through Locke and Hume and Descartes, believed that meanings were mental entities, that words were connected to ideas in the mind, that reference was mediated by internal representations, by concepts, by mental images, and if you wanted to know what someone meant by a word, you had to look inside their head, examine their thoughts, map their mental contents, and this made sense, it felt right. It aligned with the intuition that language is personal, that each person has their own private understanding of words, their own associations, their own mental dictionary, but Putnam showed that this entire picture was wrong, that two people could have identical mental contents and still mean different things by the same word. That meaning reaches beyond the skull, beyond the brain, beyond psychology entirely, into the world itself, into the environment, into the physical and social context that determines what words actually refer to. This is semantic externalism, the view that meanings are not in the head but out in the world. That reference is determined not by internal states but by external relations, by causal connections between words and things, by the history of how a word came to be used, by the community of speakers who share the word, by the natural kinds that exist independently of human thought. And this means that you can be wrong about what you mean. You can use a word your entire life and not know what it really refers to. You can have perfect confidence in your understanding and still be completely mistaken, because meaning is not something you possess. It is something you participate in, something that exists in the space between speakers and world, between language and reality, between words and the things they pick out. Putnam's argument did not stop at twin earth. He pushed further. He talked about the division of linguistic labour, the fact that most people do not know the technical details of what their words refer to. Most people cannot define gold in terms of atomic number, cannot distinguish an elm from a beech, cannot explain what makes aluminum different from molybdenum. Yet they use these words successfully. They refer to these things accurately, and they do so not because they have the right mental contents, but because they are embedded in a community where some people do have the expertise, where metallurgists know about aluminum, where botanists know about elms, where chemists know about gold. And when ordinary speakers use these words, they defer to the experts. They rely on the division of labour. They trust that somewhere in the linguistic community there are people who know what these words really mean, who can distinguish the real thing from the fake. And this trust is what allows language to function, what allows reference to succeed even in the absence of individual knowledge. This overturns the Cartesian picture entirely. Descartes believed that knowledge began with the self, with the contents of consciousness, with what could be known through introspection, and from there one built outward to knowledge of the world. But Putnam showed that the order is reversed, that knowledge of meaning requires knowledge of the world first, that you cannot know what you mean without knowing what your words refer to, and you cannot know what your words refer to just by looking inside your own mind. You have to look outside to the physical environment, to the social context, to the history of usage, to the experts who maintain the standards of reference. And this means that the self is not the foundation of knowledge, but a participant in a larger system, a node in a network of linguistic and social relations that determine meaning collectively, not individually, externally, not internally. Frege tried to solve the problem of meaning differently. He distinguished between sense and reference, between the mode of presentation and the thing presented, and he believed that sense was in the mind, that it mediated reference, that two people could refer to the same thing through different senses, like the morning star and the evening star, both referring to Venus, and this preserved the idea that meaning had a mental component, that internal states mattered. But Putnam's argument cut through this because on twin earth, Oscar and his counterpart have the same sense, the same mode of presentation, the same mental mediation, but they do not have the same reference. They are not talking about the same substance, and this means that sense alone does not determine reference, that no amount of mental content can fix what a word picks out in the world, that reference requires something beyond sense, beyond psychology, beyond anything that can be captured by introspection or phenomenology. Kripke reinforced this from another angle. He argued that names and natural kind terms were rigid designators, that they referred to the same thing in all possible worlds, not by virtue of satisfying a description, but by virtue of causal historical chains, that the word water refers to H2O because it was introduced to refer to a certain substance, and that reference was passed down through generations of speakers, through baptism and transmission, through ostension and use. And even if speakers lost track of what the substance was, even if they forgot its chemical composition, even if they developed false beliefs about it, The words still referred to the same thing, because reference is not determined by beliefs but by the causal connection between word and world, by the chain that links current usage back to the original act of naming, back to the moment when the word was first attached to the thing. This has radical implications for psychology, because it means psychology cannot determine reference, cannot tell you what your words mean, cannot give you the extension of your terms just by examining your mental states. And this was a blow to cognitive science, to theories of mind that tried to explain language purely in terms of internal representations, in terms of concepts and mental models and computational processes, because Putnam and Kripke showed that none of this is enough. That meaning leaks out of the head, that it requires the world, requires the community, requires the causal historical context, and without these external factors there is no meaning at all, just empty sounds, just syntax without semantics, just symbols shuffling around inside the skull with no connection to reality. Yet people resist this conclusion. They cling to the intuition that they know what they mean, that their words are transparent to them, that meaning is something they possess and control. And this resistance is understandable because semantic externalism is deeply unsettling. It suggests that we are strangers to our own language, that we do not fully understand the words we speak, that meaning is not something we create but something we inherit, something we are thrown into, something that precedes us and exceeds us and determines what we can say before we even open our mouths. Wittgenstein saw this too, though from a different direction. He argued that meaning is use, that words get their meaning from the language games they are embedded in, from the forms of life that give them context, and he rejected the idea of private language, the idea that meaning could be purely internal, purely subjective, because a private language would have no standards of correctness, no way to distinguish between following a rule and merely thinking one is following a rule, and without standards there is no meaning, just the illusion of meaning, just the feeling of understanding without actual understanding. And this is why language must be public, why it must be shared, why it requires a community of speakers who can correct each other, who can point out mistakes, who can maintain the norms that make reference possible. Putnam took this further. He showed not just that language is public, but that meaning is not even fully determined by the community, that it reaches beyond the community into the world itself, that natural kind terms like water and gold and tiger refer to whatever has the same underlying nature as the paradigm samples, the same deep structure, the same essential properties, and this means that meaning can outrun knowledge, that a community can use a word correctly even when they have false beliefs about what they are referring to, even when their theories are wrong, even when their understanding is incomplete, because the word latches onto the real essence, the objective structure, the natural kind that exists independently of human thought. And the world itself constrains meaning, corrects mistakes, determines reference in ways that no internal psychological state can capture. This is why Aristotle was not wrong when he talked about water, even though he did not know about molecules, even though his theory of elements was false. He was still referring to H2O because his word water was causally connected to the same substance our word water refers to, because the reference was fixed not by his beliefs, but by the stuff itself, by the samples he pointed to, by the liquid he drank and swam in and observed, and the continuity of reference across theory change, across conceptual revolutions, across the abandonment of entire frameworks, shows that meaning is anchored in the world, not in the mind, that it survives the death of theories because it was never dependent on theories in the first place. But this raises a puzzle. If meaning is not in the head, if psychological states do not determine reference, then what role does the mind play at all? What is psychology supposed to study if not meaning, if not the contents of thought, if not the representations that mediate between language and world? And Putnam's answer is that psychology studies something real. It studies mental states. It studies computational processes. It studies the functional organization of cognition, but it does not study meaning, because meaning is not a psychological phenomenon. It is a semantic phenomenon. It is a relation between words and world, between signs and reference, between language and reality, and this relation is not mediated by anything in the head. It is direct. It is external. It is constituted by causal and social factors that lie beyond the reach of introspection, beyond the scope of neuroscience, beyond the explanatory power of any psychological theory. Fodor resisted this. He wanted to preserve a role for internal content, for narrow content, for something in the head that could do explanatory work. And he argued that even if meaning is wide, even if reference is external, there must be something narrow that explains behavior, some internal state that mediates between input and output, some mental representation that the cognitive system manipulates. And he tried to carve out a space for psychology by distinguishing between wide content, which depends on the environment, and narrow content, which does not, which is purely internal, purely psychological, purely computational. But this move was always unstable because narrow content turned out to be elusive, hard to define, hard to individuate, hard to see how it could play the explanatory role Fodor wanted it to play. And many philosophers concluded that narrow content was a myth, that there was no such thing, that all content was wide, that meaning was always externalist, always dependent on factors beyond the head, and if psychology wanted to explain behavior, it would have to appeal to wide content, to states that are individuated by their relations to the environment, to representations that are only representations in virtue of their connections to what they represent. This is deeply counterintuitive, because it means that two people in identical internal states could be thinking different thoughts, could be believing different things, could be referring to different objects, just because they are in different environments, just because their words have different causal histories, just because the world around them is structured differently. And this seems to violate the intuition that mental states are internal, that what you're thinking is determined by what is going on inside your head, that consciousness is private, that the contents of experience are immediately accessible to introspection. But Putnam and Kripke showed that this intuition is wrong, that mental states are not self-intimating, that you can be mistaken about what you're thinking, that the meanings of your thoughts depend on facts about the world that you may not know, that reference is opaque, that you can use words successfully without understanding what they mean, that language works not because speakers have perfect knowledge, but because they are embedded in networks of reference that do the work for them, that connect words to things through mechanisms that operate below the level of consciousness, below the level of intentional control. Burge extended this argument to mental content itself. He argued that not just linguistic meaning, but thought itself is individuated externally, that beliefs and desires are identified by their relations to the environment, that you could not have a belief about water if you lived in a world with no water, that mental content is essentially relational, essentially dependent on what exists outside the mind, and this means that the mind is not a self-contained system, not a module that could be studied in isolation, not a computational device that processes inputs according to internal rules, but an open system, a system that is constituted by its interactions with the world, that is shaped by its environment, that cannot be understood without reference to the physical and social context it is embedded in. This has implications for artificial intelligence, for the question of whether machines can think, because if meaning is external, if reference depends on causal historical connections, if mental content is individuated by relations to the environment, then a computer program, no matter how sophisticated, cannot have genuine thoughts unless it has the right connections to the world, unless it is embedded in the right kind of causal network, unless it participates in the same linguistic and social practices that give human words their meanings. And this suggests that thought is not just computation, not just symbol manipulation, not just syntactic operations on formal structures, but something that requires embodiment, requires situatedness, requires participation in a form of life, and a brain in a vat, no matter how complex its internal processes, would not be thinking about water or trees or anything else, because its words would not be connected to anything, would not refer to anything, would be empty symbols with no semantic content, no meaning, no reference, just syntax running in a void. Putnam himself later came to doubt some of his own arguments. He worried that semantic externalism led to metaphysical realism, to the view that there is a fixed, determinate way the world is, independent of human conceptual schemes, independent of language, independent of theory, and he came to think this was incoherent, that it made reference magical, that it required a God's eye view, a perspective from nowhere that could compare words to things without being situated in any particular framework, and he moved toward internal realism, toward the view that truth and reference are always relative to a conceptual scheme, always dependent on the practices and norms of a community, always constrained by what Quine called the tribunal of experience, but never fully determined by it. And this introduced a tension, a pull between the external world that constrains reference and the internal practices that constitute meaning, a tension that Putnam never fully resolved, that perhaps cannot be resolved, because meaning lives in that tension, in the space between mind and world, between language and reality, between what we intend and what our words actually pick out. Dennett approached this from yet another angle. He argued that meaning is not a real property but a useful fiction, that intentional states are not natural kinds but interpretive stances, that when we attribute beliefs and desires, we are not discovering facts about the mind but adopting a strategy for predicting behaviour. And from this perspective, the question of whether meaning is in the head or in the world dissolves. Because meaning is not anywhere, it is not a real thing but a pattern we impose, a way of organising our understanding of complex systems. And the intentional stance works whether we apply it to humans or thermostats or chess programs. The difference is just pragmatic, just a matter of what level of description is most useful for prediction and explanation. Not a matter of what really has meaning and what does not, because nothing really has meaning. Meaning is always an interpretation, always a projection, always a way of seeing that could be otherwise. But this seems too deflationary, too quick to dismiss the felt reality of meaning, the undeniable sense that words do connect to things, that thoughts are about the world. That reference is not just a useful fiction but a real relation, and even if we cannot fully explain how this relation works, even if semantic externalism leaves gaps and puzzles, it at least takes seriously the intuition that language matters, that what we say makes a difference, that truth is not just coherence within a system but correspondence with reality, however elusive and problematic that correspondence may be. And to give up on this, to reduce meaning to a mere interpretive stance, feels like giving up on something essential, something worth preserving even if we cannot fully explain it, even if it leads to paradoxes and tensions that resist resolution. Because the alternative is a world where nothing means anything, where language floats free of reality, where thought is cut loose from the world, and that is a world too empty, too barren, too divorced from lived experience to be acceptable, even if it is theoretically cleaner, even if it avoids the hard problems, even if it makes philosophy easier by making meaning disappear. Shame is not emotion but is technology, is the mechanism through which groups control individuals, through which societies enforce norms, through which collectives ensure conformity without the need for constant surveillance, constant punishment, constant external force, because the force becomes internal, becomes the voice inside that judges, that condemns, that produces the feeling of being fundamentally wrong, fundamentally defective, fundamentally unworthy. And this feeling is more powerful than any external punishment. is more effective than any threat, is the weapon that societies have perfected over millennia, the conversion of social judgment into self-judgment, the transformation of external control into internal monitoring. And the monitoring is constant, is automatic, is happening at every moment, in every decision, in every thought that might deviate from what is acceptable, what is expected, what is required. And the requirement is not explicit, is not written down, is absorbed through observation, through imitation, through the 1,000 small corrections that shape children into members of the group. And the shaping is violent, is coercive, is the moulding of consciousness to fit the pattern that the society demands. And the demands vary by culture, by context, by what behaviours serve the group's interests. But the mechanism is universal, is present in every society, is the way that humans have solved the problem of coordination, the problem of getting individuals to behave in ways that benefit the collective, even when those behaviours conflict with individual interest, and the conflict is constant. Is the tension between what the self wants and what the group requires? And shame is what tips the balance, is what makes the group's requirements feel like the self's requirements, is what converts external judgment into internal compulsion. And the compulsion is not experienced as coercion, but as conscience, as the sense of right and wrong that seems to come from within, but is really coming from the group, from the internalized voices of parents, of peers, of authorities, of all the representatives of social norms who have spoken, and whose speaking has been absorbed, has been converted into the inner voice that judges, that shames, that produces the feeling that is unbearable, that is worse than pain. That is the sense of being exposed, of being seen in one's wrongness, in one's defectiveness, in one's failure to meet the standards that everyone else seems to meet effortlessly. And the effortlessness is illusion, is the result of successful internalization, is what happens when shame has done its work, when the external has become internal, when the monitoring is so automatic that it feels like nature, like the way things are, like the voice of truth rather than the voice of power. And power is what shame is the exercise of control, is the way that the group extends its reach into the individual, into the mind, into the private space where decisions are made. And the decisions are not free, are not autonomous, are shaped by the anticipation of shame, by the fear of exposure, by the need to maintain the facade of being acceptable, of being worthy, of being someone who meets the standards. And the standards are impossible, are designed to be impossible, are set high enough that everyone fails, that everyone is vulnerable to shame, that everyone needs the group's forgiveness, the group's acceptance, the group's willingness to overlook the failures, as long as the proper contrition is shown, the proper submission is performed, the proper deference is given to the norms that were violated, and the violation is inevitable, is guaranteed, is the way that shame maintains its power. Because if everyone could meet the standards, then shame would lose its force, would become irrelevant, would no longer be useful for control. And so the standards are calibrated, are adjusted, are maintained at the level where most people are failing most of the time, are feeling inadequate, are needing reassurance, are seeking validation. And the seeking is the mechanism, is the way that shame produces conformity, produces obedience, produces the constant effort to be good, to be acceptable, to be worthy of belonging. And belonging is what is at stake, is what shame threatens, is the thing that will be lost if the shame is too great, if the exposure is too complete, if the judgment is too severe. And the severity is variable, is depending on culture, on context, on what the group needs to enforce. And what it needs to enforce varies, is different in honour cultures, where shame is about reputation, about the family's standing, about the public face that must be maintained, and in guilt cultures, where shame is about internal. States about intentions, about the purity of the conscience, and the conscience is the internalized judge, is the voice that speaks even when no one is watching, that produces guilt even in private, that makes the internal monitoring as effective as external surveillance. And the effectiveness is what makes guilt cultures powerful, is what allows them to function with less overt control, with less public punishment. Because the punishment is internal, is the guilt that gnaws, that torments, that produces the feeling of being wrong, even when the behavior is hidden, even when the transgression is secret. And the secret is what guilt cultures target, is what they make unbearable, is what they convert into shame through the internalization of norms, through the creation of conscience, through the training of the inner voice to judge, to condemn, to produce the feeling that is worse than any external punishment. And the worse is the genius of the system, is the efficiency of shame, is the way that control becomes self-control, that power becomes invisible, that coercion becomes choice, and the choice is not free but is shaped by the anticipation of shame, by the fear of guilt, by the need to avoid the feeling that is unbearable. And the unbearable is what shame produces, is the emotion that is more painful than physical pain, that is more threatening than external danger, that is triggering the same neural circuits as social death, as exile, as the exclusion that in ancestral environments meant literal death, meant the end of survival. And so the fear of shame is ancient, is hardwired, is operating at levels deeper than reason, deeper than conscious thought, is producing reactions that are automatic, that are visceral, that are overwhelming. And the overwhelming is what makes shame effective, is what makes it useful for control, is what makes it the primary mechanism through which societies enforce norms, maintain order, ensure that individuals behave in ways that serve the collective. And the serving is not voluntary, is not chosen, is coerced through shame, through the threat of exposure, through the fear of judgment. And the judgment is constant, is omnipresent, is coming from others and from the self, from the internalized voices that have become the conscience, the superego, the inner critic that never rests, never forgives, never allows the self to feel acceptable, to feel worthy, to feel free from the threat of shame. And the threat is maintained through public shaming, through the rituals that expose transgressions, that make violations visible, that demonstrate what happens to those who break the rules. And the demonstration is warning, is deterrent, is the reminder that shame is always possible, is always lurking, is always ready to destroy the reputation, the standing, the sense of belonging that makes life bearable. And the bearable is what shame threatens, is what it takes away, is what it uses as leverage to control, to coerce, to enforce the norms that maintain the group, that preserve the hierarchy, that ensure that power is distributed according to the rules. And the rules are not natural, are not discovered, are imposed, are created by those who benefit from them, by those who have power, by those who use shame to maintain their position, to prevent challenge, to ensure that those below stay below, that those who are shamed remain shamed, that the hierarchy is preserved. And the preservation is what shame serves, is what it accomplishes, is the maintenance of order through the creation of internal monitoring, through the transformation of social control into self-control. And the self-control is not freedom, but is the most perfect form of slavery, is the condition where the chains are invisible, where the prison is internal, where the guard is the self, and the self cannot escape, cannot rebel, cannot refuse, because the refusal would produce shame, would trigger the feeling that is unbearable, would expose the self to judgment. And the judgment is what is feared most, is what drives behavior, is what makes people do things they do not want to do, believe things they do not believe, perform roles they do not choose, because the alternative is shame, is exposure, is the loss of belonging. And belonging is survival, is the thing that makes life possible, that makes existence tolerable, that provides meaning and purpose and the sense that one matters. And mattering is what shame threatens, is what it takes away, is what it holds hostage. And the hostage is the self, is the identity that is constructed through the internalization of norms, through the absorption of judgments, through the acceptance of the standards that the group imposes, and the imposing is not negotiable, is not optional, is the price of membership, the cost of belonging, the requirement for survival, and survival requires shame, requires the capacity to feel it, to be shaped by it, to use it to regulate behavior, to monitor thought, to police the boundaries of the acceptable. And the acceptable is narrow, is constrained, is defined by the group, and the group's definition is arbitrary, is variable, is serving interests that are not the individual's interests, that are the interests of power, of hierarchy, of the maintenance of the order that benefits some at the expense of others. And the others are kept in place through shame, through the feeling that they are less, that they are wrong, that they are unworthy, and the unworthiness is not fact but is assignment, is the judgment that the group makes, that the individual internalizes, that becomes the truth of the self, the core belief around which identity is organized, and the organization is pathological, is producing suffering, is creating the sense that the self is fundamentally defective, fundamentally wrong, fundamentally deserving of the judgment, and the judgment is harsh, is relentless, is coming from within and without, from the self and from others, and the others are always watching, always judging, always ready to shame. And the readiness is maintained through public shaming, through the revival of practices that were thought to be barbaric, to be outdated, to be incompatible with modern values, but are returning, are being embraced, are being used with new technologies, with social media, with the platforms that make public shaming instantaneous, global, permanent. And the permanence is new, is the addition that technology brings, is the way that shame now lasts forever, is recorded, is searchable, is never forgotten. And the never forgotten is the enhancement of shame, is the intensification of its power, is the conversion of temporary judgment into permanent stigma. And the stigma is the mark, is the label, is the thing that defines the person, that reduces them to their failure, to their transgression, to the moment when they were exposed, when they were judged, when they were shamed. And the shaming is not correction, is not education, is not intended to help, but is intended to punish, to exclude, to destroy. And the destruction is what public shaming achieves, is what it is designed to do, is the elimination of the person from the community, from the acceptable, from the realm of those who matter. And the mattering is what is taken away, is what shame removes, is what is lost when the judgment is public, when the exposure is complete, when the person becomes the embodiment of wrongness, of defectiveness, of unworthiness, and the unworthiness is total, is overwhelming, is the condition that produces not just embarrassment, but the deeper shame, the toxic shame, the shame that is not about what one did, but about what one is, and the is the problem, is the conversion of behavior into identity, is the judgment that extends from the action to the actor, from the mistake to the person, from the moment to the essence. And the essence is what shame targets, is what it damages, is what it destroys, is the sense of being fundamentally acceptable, fundamentally worthy, fundamentally deserving of existence. And the existence becomes questionable, becomes something that must be justified, must be earned, must be proven through the constant performance of acceptability, and the performance is exhausting, is impossible, is the burden that shame creates, is the weight that is carried by everyone who has internalized the judgment, who has absorbed the norms, who has become the monitor of their own behavior. And the monitoring is constant, is automatic, is producing anxiety, is producing the sense that at any moment the failure might happen, the exposure might occur, the shame might descend, and the descending is what is feared, is what drives the performance, is what makes people desperate to be good, to be acceptable, to be beyond reproach. And the beyond reproach is impossible, is unattainable, is the standard that ensures everyone is vulnerable, everyone is exposed, everyone is subject to shame, and the subject is the self, is the identity that is constructed through shame, that is defined by the internalized judgments, that is shaped by the fear of exposure. And the exposure is what social media enables, is what the digital age amplifies, is the possibility that at any moment anything might be revealed, anything might be judged, anything might become the basis for public shaming. And the basis is often trivial, is often a mistake, is often something that in another context would be ignored, would be forgotten, would be forgiven, but in the context of public shaming becomes unforgivable, becomes the thing that defines, that destroys, that reduces the person to the object of judgment, to the target of collective rage, to the scapegoat that the group needs, that the society uses, that shame requires. Because shame is not just individual, but is collective, is not just personal, but is social, is not just feeling, but is function, is the mechanism through which groups maintain cohesion, through which societies enforce norms, through which power maintains itself, and the maintenance is achieved through the constant threat of shame, through the ever-present possibility of exposure, through the fear that keeps people in line, keeps them conforming, keeps them performing the roles that the society assigns. And the assignment is not chosen, is not negotiated, is imposed through shame, through the feeling that to deviate is to be wrong, to be defective, to be unworthy. And the unworthiness is the lever, is the tool, is the way that power operates, is the currency that shame represents, is the thing that is spent, that is accumulated, that is traded in the social economy, where reputation is wealth, where honor is capital, where shame is debt, and the debt is inherited, is passed down, is the legacy of transgression, is what families carry, what lineages bear, what communities cannot escape. Because shame is not just about the individual, but is about the group, is about the collective honor that must be maintained, that must be protected, that must be defended against the contamination of shame. And the contamination is what happens when one member transgresses, when one person is exposed, when one individual brings shame upon the family, upon the community, upon the collective. And the collective responds with punishment, with exclusion, with the violence that is justified by the need to restore honor, to remove the stain, to eliminate the source of shame. And the elimination can be social, can be physical, can be the death that honor cultures prescribe, that honor killings enforce, that the logic of shame demands when the transgression is too great, when the exposure is too complete, when the only way to restore honor is to destroy the source of dishonor, and the destruction is murder, is violence, is the extreme form of shame's power, is what happens when shame is not just emotion, but is law, is not just feeling, but is justice, is not just internal, but is external, is enforced not just by conscience, but by the community. And the community is the enforcer, is the judge, is the executioner, is the thing that makes shame lethal, that makes shame literal death. And the death is what shame has always threatened, is what it has always implied, is what it is metaphorically, and sometimes literally, producing, is the end of social existence, the end of belonging, the end of the self as recognized, as valued, as mattering. And the mattering is what makes life worth living, is what makes existence bearable, is what shame takes away, is what shame holds hostage, is what shame uses to control, to coerce, to enforce the norms that maintain the group, that preserve the hierarchy, that ensure that power remains distributed according to the rules. And the rules are maintained through shame, are enforced through guilt, are perpetuated through the internalization of judgment, through the conversion of external control into internal monitoring, through the creation of the conscience that is not freedom, but is the most sophisticated form of slavery, is the condition where the individual has become the agent of their own oppression, has become the enforcer of the norms that harm them, has become the voice that judges, that shames, that makes life unbearable. And the unbearable is what shame produces, is what it is designed to produce, is the mechanism through which societies control individuals, through which power maintains itself, through which the currency of shame is spent, is accumulated, is traded, is the thing that makes social life possible, that makes coordination achievable, that makes conformity enforceable, and the enforcement is continuous, is total, is the permanent condition of social existence, is the cost of belonging, is the price of survival, is the burden that everyone carries, is the weight of shame, of guilt, of the internalized judgment that never rests, never forgives, never allows the self to be free, to be acceptable, to be beyond the reach of shame. And the reach is infinite, is extending into every moment, every decision, every thought, is the omnipresent threat that keeps people in line, that makes them perform, that makes them conform, that makes them serve the group even when the group is serving power, is maintaining hierarchy, is preserving the order that benefits the few at the expense of the many, and the many are controlled through shame, are kept in place through guilt, are made to believe that their suffering is their fault, is their failure, is their unworthiness, and the unworthiness is the lie, is the mechanism, is the currency of shame, is what keeps the system running, what makes power invisible, what converts coercion into choice, and the choice is not free but is shaped by shame, by guilt, by the fear of judgment, by the anticipation of exposure, by the threat that is always there, always present, always ready to descend, and the descending is what everyone fears, is what everyone avoids, is what everyone works to prevent, and the preventing is the work, is the performance, is the conformity, is the submission, is the acceptance of the norms, the internalization of the judgment, the absorption of the shame that is the currency, that is the mechanism, that is the way that societies control, that power maintains itself, that individuals are shaped into members of the group, and the shaping is violence, is coercion, is the transformation of the self into the thing that the group needs, and the need is conformity, is obedience, is the willingness to carry the shame, to feel the guilt, to be the subject of judgment, and the subject is what shame creates, is what guilt produces, is the self that is never free, never acceptable, never beyond the reach of the currency that is shame, that is guilt, that is the mechanism through which humanity controls itself, enforces its norms, maintains its order, and the order is maintained through suffering, through the feeling that is unbearable, through the emotion that is technology, through the currency of shame.